Okay, Venerable.
Okay. Good morning. I don't see anything.
But you won't, because this is just going straight out to YouTube, so other people won't be joining, but they'll be able to see you.
Okay, so all I have is the screen that says Zoom launch meeting.
You're in, so you can just go ahead and start your talk.
Okay, but I'm not supposed to see anybody, not even
Okay,
myself.
Venerable.
Okay. Good morning.
Good
I don't
morning.
see anything.
But you won't.
Okay. Good morning. I think I'd like to continue from last week. And last week we were talking about the 8 attributes of a fully endowed human life, and we talked about the qualities of a highly qualified human existence. And those 8 attributes were long life, beauty, high status, wealth and resources, persuasive speech, power and influence, freedom and independence, and a strong mind and a strong body. And then, of course, we talked about their advantages. We talked about their functions, and we talked about the causes for a rebirth with those particular characteristics manifesting in our lives. But to kind of balance that out today, I'd like to talk about what comes before that. We sometimes think because we were born into this world that this becomes the first existence of the mind stream, but one has to actually ask where did this mind stream come from? We can kind of figure out the body part of it, but not so much the mind and the mind stream. I don't have my mother's mind or my father's mind. I actually don't even have their body, but I can recognize that the coming together in the elemental sphere or arena produced the physical body. But what about this mind? And so the Buddha speaks of the rebirth linking consciousness, or sometimes we call it reincarnation, but reincarnation kind of implies, from how we have used the word over the years, it implies a self that comes back again and again and again. And he did not explain it in that way, but it's more like running a relay, and you have the baton and you're running, and you get up to the end of the line and the race has not been won. The race is not over. You pass the baton, and then another person on your team grabs hold of the baton, and they run and they keep running until finally someone crosses the finish line. So if you could, it's not exactly like that, but it's something like that. And if you could get that image in your mind, it might allow one to be more open to the concept the Buddha taught about concerning rebirth linking consciousness. I mean, honestly, if you don't, it's going to be very difficult for you to get the full benefit of the teachings. They may give you some comfort in dealing with and overcoming the vicissitudes of this life, but you're still going to be trapped in samsara. And so I asked last week, what is samsara? Or what is the suffering, first of all, the suffering that the Buddha talked about. And we tend to think the suffering is the suffering of what I go through every day with the 8 worldly winds, particularly what we consider the negative ones, like blame, loss, pain, shame, and to a limited extent, um, the positive ones that we would like praise, gain, pleasure, and fame. Okay, and so he said that actually all 8 of them have fruit-bearing properties that cause a becoming in the phenomenal world, not necessarily this particular world. It has there are certain um, reasons or causes for there to be an appearance in this world, as well as for there to be an appearance in other worlds, whether it's the hell realms or the hungry ghost realm or the deva realms or the god realms, or the pure lands of the awakened ones. And most of us are familiar with some of these worlds, but not so much the pure lands. Some of us even think perhaps that maybe Shakyamuni Buddha was the only Buddha, and that somehow his teachings have gotten a little bit mixed up with nihilism, and we think that there is no longer any um, existence for Buddhas, but that's not what he said. There's no longer any existence in the phenomenal world unless by reason of one's freedom or a Buddha's freedom, they choose to make an appearance in a world because they're completely unbound, completely liberated, completely free. Uh, uh, and and he likened it to the freedom of a fire going out, and how when the fire is no longer attached to the elements that cause it to burn, then it is free. So it's not a ceasing to exist. There is realm for the Buddhists, the pure lands, but you have to be pure to be in them. Otherwise, how could it be a pure land? Okay, so we concentrate on some of these other realms and the causes and conditions and the karma that causes a reappearance in those worlds. But I want to go back to the beginning, because if we start off, you know, in a wrong place, many times we never reach our destination. And one thing I know is that here particularly in the West, some other places have some other issues, but particularly in the West, we started with at the top end of the ennobling path, the Eightfold Path. And it says that if we do all of these other things, starting with right view, we can end up with what we call right meditation. If there's right meditation, then there has to be, like not right meditation or wrong meditation. Wrong in the sense of we could even say it won't have its benefit, because the full understanding of what we are engaging in taking up and how to do it um, is it's incorrect, and due to this incorrectness, we miss our goal. And so we say, well, what did Buddha teach? And they say, oh, well, he taught suffering and the end of suffering. But what kind of suffering? What was he referring to when he spoke of suffering? Uh, the suffering that he spoke of was the rounds of rebirth, the uninterrupted rebirth without freedom or control. So he was teaching us that there is a way out of samsara, this samsaric existence, this constant and uninterrupted rebirth uh, without freedom and control. There's not a single living being in samsara, not just in the human world, but in the animal world, the deva realms, the god realms, the hell realms, the hungry ghost realms. There's not a single living being who has been free to choose his or her present form of life, or who enjoys freedom or control over his or her experiences in life. We don't choose the country where we're born, the parents that we have. We can't choose when we die. We can't choose whether we're born into wealth or poverty, and even though there are many of us who enjoy great freedoms, um, but the fact is that they are bound to experience suffering just like everyone else. So the wealthy, we may look just at the money that they have and think who could ask for anything more, but their lives are a total wreck and they're nothing but misery. uh, or sickness. We can come sick um, without choice. We die without choice, and we take rebirth without choice. So there's no way that we can experience real peace and happiness um, in this life if we understood the suffering. And because we are myopic and narrow in our view of life, coming from a perspective of an identity, an individual I, we don't see the big picture, and we don't see this uninterrupted uh, suffering that we are actually experiencing in samsara. So the Buddha pointed it out and said, you need to look at that. You need to reflect on it. You need to think about it. And in thinking about it, even no matter how good our life is going, we can see that there's truth. There's no one within the sound of my voice today who has not suffered and who is not suffering in some aspect, uh, if they would look closely. Uh, and so this was the suffering that the Buddha was talking about. Now, of course, it's just like if you walk on a dusty road. I say it all the time. Or if you walk on a road, say with um, gold dust road, made of gold dust, and it could be compact, but as you walk, little bits of the gold dust, the flake will just come up and they'll land on your shoes. So there's no way you can walk on the road and not get some of it on your shoes. In the same way, we encounter pleasantness to a degree in this life, and we encounter suffering uh, to a degree in this life. And so they talked about what it takes for us to really begin to understand the suffering of samsara, to really see it, to really uh, agree with the reality of that, and then to take up instructions for training the mind in the stages of the path towards developing the wish to attain liberation from this uninterrupted rebirth without freedom or control, and um, and how to practice, truly practice walking the path that leads to that kind of liberation. Mm. So there's a shifting in the mind that has to occur, a shifting in the vision that has to occur, a shifting in even our ways of hearing that have to occur, a shifting in the way we conceptualize and put things together that has to occur. And we have divided, unfortunately, the Buddhist teachings into what we called schools, and then their lineages within those schools. And we've made them like the Theravada and the Mahayana and the Vajrayana. Of course, the Mahayanas and Vajrayana um, referred to the Theravadas as Hinayanas, or you call it the lesser vehicle, the lesser path, more of a concentration on personal freedoms. Um, Maha meaning great, having an aspiration for the freedom of all beings, and Vajra being the absolute diamond, that which is unbreakable as the highest trainings. But if we didn't divide them up in those ways, we could see that a practitioner's path or journey takes them through three stages, one being the foundational teachings, um, like the Satipatthana uh, Sutta, and most of the suttas deal with that have been translated, deal with the fundamental practices of the path. And it's very necessary to have these. If you don't have them and you start with some other practices, there, uh, there is not a good ability to understand them in their depths. And although you may have your fingers on the pulse of some of what we called the the secret teachings, the higher trends, more elusive uh, teachings, um, that when you move from black black and white, this is beneficial, this is not, this is useful, this is not, and then it starts to break down into these various shades of gray, and one becomes more discerning and one becomes more discriminating. But if you haven't had the correct foundation, your discrimination and your discernment will be off. On the other hand, if you stay only with the foundational teachings, you also will not develop discrimination, or your discrimination will be off. And so trying to get away from this is a Theravada teaching, this is a Mahayana teaching, this is a Vajrayana teaching. Let's talk about just the teachings, and they move from the initial stage to the intermediate um, stage, and then ultimately, to the highest stages of training. So um, I'd like to talk a little bit about the what comes before these 8 attributes that we have in our present human life. We can tell what attitudes we've had in the past and what actions we've engaged in simply by observing our present states of mind and our experiences. So, for instance, it is said that if we have a strong interest in the Dharma, and this level of inquiry into the true nature of reality, then it indicates that we have practiced Dharma in past. So this mind stream comes with some seeds that when they are watered, they quickly bring forth fruit, and one has a strong interest in the Dharma. And sometimes some people can realize renunciation or bodhicitta and or the correct view of emptiness without doing much meditation, because they have familiarized themselves with these meditations in the past. And although we forget maybe our past lives, the potentialities of the past actions remain within the mind stream, and it's easy for us to resume old habits, whether they're good habits or whether they're bad habits. So when we think about the propensities that we have, they're not just propensities that have occurred or that we've necessarily developed in in this life, but it's the watering of seeds in the mind stream that bring forth similar mind thoughts, and allow the continuation of similar habits. And so we might find that we have a propensity towards passion and longing, or towards irritation and aversion, or towards delusion and superstition, or a propensity towards excessive thought or worry, a propensity, for no reason. Maybe nobody in your family was like that. There's nothing that's happened in your life that makes you seems to point to that being a response to some difficulty or some hardship that you've had. You may have a propensity to gullibility and snap judgments, or to curiosity and reasoning things through. Um, And all of these propensities are associated with different thoughts and preoccupations, and they exist full blown in the heart of every person. Every person has them all to some degree, but whatever gets watered and nurtured begins to produce a bumper crop, and um, and uh, it's becomes obvious what one's mind is constantly thinking and pondering on by one's words and one's actions. Um, and so there's a correlation between this and rebirth. Um, so uh, if a person has an underlying preoccupation with sadness or pain, then they're bound for the realms or the regions that is the conscious, the vibratory pattern of that particular plane. So they're bound for realms of deprivation. So we talk about coming from a certain place into existence as a human, and we talk about leaving the human life and being and that mind stream being bound to produce the conditions for a phenomenon to appear in a world that holds and that certain frequency can manifest in. So, uh, a person with a low level of pleasure and happiness, preoccupation is, of course, bound for rebirth on the human level or the human planes. And those with a stronger level of pleasure and happiness bound for rebirth in the heavenly realm. So sometimes we think of a person who has a lot of greed, who likes really nice things, whose eyes don't even want to look at anything that's not nice. And we think, oh, what a stuck up, selfish person that is, high minded, highfalutin. But it could be the rebirth of a being coming from a deva realm where they were accustomed to these nice things, and now they're thrown into the human existence due to karma, and and they have a propensity for nice things, for pleasure, for enjoyment, for happiness. And so that's the suffering and the danger that the Buddha was trying to point us to, help us to see, because it's hard to see and hard to understand. And so Buddha makes an appearance in the world um, out of compassion for the world to uh, help us to wake up from this kind of delusion. Um, so if there's a person, let's say, that has a preoccupation, or they remain fairly equanimous, and uh, they're generous because they're not grasping for anything in life, for being noticed, for being recognized, for being important, for having they're not concerned about uh, whether they have worth or value to you, not trying to win your favor. Um, then they are bound for rebirth in the Brahma worlds on the formless level, because they're moving towards um, um, the the true essence of their being, which is inherently empty, for emptiness. And so these different levels of tranquility lead to different results. And then, of course, when one fully awakens, then one's off the wheel of samsara, or the rebirth linking construct, and there is the abiding in the pure lands where there's no coming and there's no uh, going. And it doesn't mean that there is not the operation of mobility or appearance, but it means that one is not vested in any individual, in any individuated personality or personhood. I would only think of personhood if you're a human being, actually. That's what a person is. I don't think dogs think about personhood. I don't think neighbors think about personhood at all. We just think about it because that's the name that we've given for ourselves and this particular appearance in this particular life. Yeah. Uh, so I'd like to read something from by that Don McCurdy said in the commentary on valid cognition. He said, those who sincerely wish to attain liberation do not need a teacher who's clairvoyant and who can see how many insects live underneath the ground or how many atoms are assembled there. Nor do they need a teacher who can see far into the distance. Even vultures can do that. But what they do need is a teacher who knows what are the objects to be abandoned, what are the objects to be accomplished, and what are the methods for abandoning and accomplishing them. And if those who desire liberation follow a teacher who reveals such correct spiritual paths, they will accomplish their aim. And without such a teacher, liberation is impossible. I remember in one sutta, the Buddha was talking to his disciples, and I was kind of shocked at his languaging and the way that he expressed something, but I knew he was doing it out of his compassion and he was getting a point across, not because he needed, for any egotistical purposes, but he said, you are I am the teacher. I am the one that knows. You are the student. You're the disciple. You're the one who does not know. And he says, until one comes to that conclusion, it's not much that the teacher can do to help him. So when we are reading the Dharma, if we're taking it up with the attitude or the mind that we don't know and that we're trying, we're willing to be led in a direction that we can know, not led in a direction that we accept blindly by faith, but being led in a direction where the knowledge can reveal itself, then it takes an attitude like that. We have to be teachable. And again, I say being teachable doesn't mean blind faith, but it means really willing to take in the instructions that are offered, to really ponder them, not just reject them offhand because you don't feel that way, or because we don't think that way, or because that's not how I've understood it in the past, or because that's not the way a teacher I do like related it to me. But he's teaching us how to really, really awaken the enlightenment factor of investigation, and to look deeply at things with a higher wisdom than our ordinary human wisdom. And it takes looking through that lens to reach any ground higher than ordinary wisdom or ordinary understanding. Uh, that which taps us in to um, a more universal construct and more than just what we see and what we can surmise, in our everyday ordinary living. So at present, we don't clearly distinguish between objects to be abandoned and objects to be attained, because our teachings haven't pointed us towards that. We've not been um, uh, encouraged along the lines of the absolute, but more towards the relative. And it's not that the relative is not important, because we need the relative. Need to know how to function, like wherever we are, however we are, and learn enough to take the next step. So the relative is definitely important, but the relative needs to be placed on the map or the screen, um, in accordance with its true level, its true status. So we need to have an overview of the whole territory and the little marker that says you are here. And when we can hold it like that, then there's some place for us to go. But when we become myopic and the "you are here" gets blown up until it takes up the whole map, then we don't know which way to go. We don't know um, what to do. And so there's been, um, because that full view has not been uh, generously offered, but rather perhaps out of a human compassion, a uh, an earnest inquiry into the suffering of the eight worldly winds, we have not gotten a strong impression of the whole journey or the whole territory. And this is what I'm dedicating my life to for the rest of my life, um, is really trying to help lay out a map of the whole territory. And then we can just use our thumbtack. And as we go through the stages of development, I'm here, and then we can remove that tack. I am now here. I'm now here. And we can know where we are in along the whole path of awakening. And so, according to the Dharma, the main object to be abandoned is samsara, that uh, that uninterrupted rebirth without freedom or control. So, as I said before, we can tell then, what attitudes we've had in the past, not just in this life, but in the mind stream, there simply by observing, present states of mind. Sometimes ever since I was a little child, I've had an interest in this. I've had an interest in that. I had a propensity towards this. I was not like anybody else in my family. All of these things. And so we know that we may have forgotten some experiences, but there in the mind stream is that seed, uh, and as that seed gets nurtured and watered, then it's going to grow and produce a crop after its own kind. So after its own qualities and, and so forth. So I'd like to take us, if I could, a little bit um, into how um, one can like gradually begin to abandon the imprints that are of the imprints of delusion that are in our mind, or the obscurations to seeing clearly. We talk a lot about um, meditation, on mindfulness, and very little about jhana. But when the Buddha awakened, he awakened and he described his jhanic experience as his awakening. So that's all I'm saying about that. And he talked about the various watches of the night and what he awakened to as he entered the first jhana and the second jhana and the third jhana. And, so there's something there in that that we should investigate. And if you notice, as there was more of a concentration and a focus, it's not concentration in the superficial ways that we think of concentrating, but it was a an ability to um, dial the mind uh, up to a crystal clear sharpness that it could penetrate the delusions of the ordinary mind and the delusions uh, uh, of life according to the ways that we have received and reconciled the information that comes in through what we hear and see and taste and touch and smell and think. And so, and when he discovered that, and coming out of meditation, he said, like what you see that can be uh, misleading. What you hear, or your way of hearing, that can be misleading. And so the information that we're gathering from the sense gates, he said, cannot be wholly relied upon. It says, but there is an intrinsic nature that one has that can be wholly relied upon, but you have to learn how to locate it, because you won't find it in um, any of those other consciousnesses that allow us to interact with the world here. I watch my cat sometimes, and 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 my cat is playing with some being, you know, but I can't see him. But obviously, the cat sees him. And I sit there and I watch him. He's not like just, throwing his paw in the air. He's actually playing with someone. So I know when he's doing that, that there are beings that he has even with his visual or some other sensory perception, has the capacity to see or feel or interact with. And so we are limited by the bandwidth of our different sense bases, and if we remind ourselves that we are limited, then then we could probably imagine through these techniques and these practices and these methods that there are ways to extend or expand, you know, those bandwidths so that we become less limited. Now, that's what uh, the Buddha called supernormal powers, and there's skills and qualities that develop in us, uh, um, along with our increasing virtue, that become useful in the world. It's difficult, they say, for the blind to lead the blind, but if one has sight, then he can lead another person. So if we were to say that blindness is our currently encountered state, that one uh, or one who could see then has and if that was our natural state of blindness, which is like delusion, then one could see that one who can see would have a super normal capacity to aid and to assist. So if we think of these abilities that can be gained as nothing more than the expansion of or the reducing of the limitations of our um, of our sense bases, then one could have more of an acceptance to them. I do want to say something about wrong view, because of our delusion, we definitely have wrong views about a lot of things. But for wrong view to really be to really take hold in a way that is uh, uh, really detrimental, is that there are some um, factors that must be present. So, of course, if you don't know something or you don't understand something, then maybe you can hold a wrong view. Let's call that an incorrect view. But it becomes more like a wrong view when you tenaciously refute what you don't know. If you don't know, then you don't know. Something may be possible and you don't think it is. Well, you don't think it is, but you don't know. But when one starts to look for all the evidence to point to refuting it, rather than looking for evidence to support it, that's when we move really into the heart of the center of wrong view, wanting to tenaciously hold on to our views and refusing to let go, even getting upset and angry and resentful and having malice in one's heart. Um, around um, a view that the Dharma expresses as true. So what I have a practice that if I encounter something that's a stretch for me, that's a bit too much for me where I am in my current understanding, then I I just take the the stance that the Buddha took one day. Somebody asked him something. He said, "It may be, oh monk." You know, uh, he knew the person didn't have the capacity to understand the answer. He didn't even try to give it to him. He just said whatever the guy asked him about you. He said, "It may be." He said, "It may be, oh monk." And so, if we keep a lighter um, hand on that which we have um, resistance to, I tell you, it will serve you it will serve you in your inquiry. So we think of these two paths, like one for personal liberation and one embarking upon the Bodhisattva path. And we've tied that up, we've bound that up, we've wrapped that up into, this notion of compassion, the Bodhisattva who hears the cries of the world and responds with uh, compassion and compassion, that we usually say, but uh, I think it should be said they respond with compassion and power, or compassion and abilities, compassion and capacities, capabilities to actually help and assist. You know, in the word ways that we can recognize, like being powerful and expressive in their words, that they can convince, or they can someone, or they can turn someone from something, uh, or they can present something in such a beautiful way that it becomes easy to be entreated, or that they have the capacity and the good fortune to assist in certain ways. And all of those 8 ways that I mentioned about having a, a fortunate human life, uh, the qualities, or the good qualities of life that are here to be utilized along the path, as opposed to for our own self-aggrandizement. But I'd like to give you another idea concerning the Bodhisattva path. I would say that a Bodhisattva is not one who is overcome by compassion. I think the compassion naturally arises with a certain kind of wisdom, and that is the understanding of emptiness, and that the more one uh, uh, you maybe start with an intellectual understanding of emptiness, but not having realized emptiness directly, and with a motivation of bodhicitta, meditating on emptiness single pointedly, one loses the sense of an individuated uh, self, and as that happens, there is still there a subtle wisdom consciousness that can examine, that can examine the object, which is emptiness, uh, without disturbing the concentration. So the concentration and the effort towards concentration, I'm putting there with my human or capacity, but then uh, in the development of that, it becomes apparent that there is a subtle wisdom consciousness apart from that, so that this human consciousness through concentration can observe the arising and the deepening of that other subtle wisdom consciousness, you know. And so that wisdom consciousness can examine emptiness without disturbing, the stillness of the human mind. And when it has a special kind of subtleness and a certain kind of, it's supple. Um, it's the best way that I can, it's malleable, it's flexible, and it allows for um, a, a more expansive kind of seeing. In the Mahamudra of liberation, they call it the oceanic mind essence. Just those three words are so beautiful to me, the oceanic mind essence. Um, and I'll tell you, I have a special relationship with the ocean. Actually, was in a swimming pool, and I dived um, off the diving. No, I didn't dive off the board. I dived into the low end of the pool, and I hit my head. And I don't think I completely lost consciousness, but I got disoriented, and I um, I couldn't. Uh, Maybe I did dive off the board. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that I hit my head and I was drowning. And uh, and so I lost consciousness. And I remember at that last breath, when I realized I could uh, not breathe anymore. I could not hold my breath another second, you know. And then I just kind of let go. And then time shifted for me. I lost a sense of moment by moment time. It just seemed like everything moved into uh, a slow motion. And then I can't even say I was out of the body, but that there was a separation between the body and a consciousness. Uh, And that's why, even though I have not penetrated it all in a full and clear way, I know from that experience alone that there is something and that there is a consciousness that moves forward and survives after death. And so, but everything shifted in that moment. And there was a certain kind of ease and a certain kind of calm that came after the struggle, at the end of the struggle, when I could not struggle anymore. And there was the acceptance. Then there came a certain freedom that I had. But then a lifeguard jumped in and he saved me and he brought me back. And then the stress was back. And I would call it the stress of living was back. Now, I have no desire to commit suicide, kill myself, die tomorrow, any of that. But what I am saying is that experience set me up for being able to consider things that I may not have considered if I had not had that experience. So sometimes we can't always uh, define uh, or describe uh, why we hold certain things, except there is a direct experience that has cracked the door to some understanding that our critical thinking intellectual mind may not be ready for, but yet we've had that opening, and so it paves the way for us to be able to receive something in a certain way that benefits us more than the one who didn't have that experience. I can't call it a bad experience. Actually, it was a great experience because it left my mind open in certain kinds of ways to for more information uh, to to come in. But if we think of the true mind or the true heart of the Bodhisattva, uh, it's one who has um, let's say if we're trying to understand emptiness and we have a glass of Kool-Aid, and our own understanding is the red glass of Kool-Aid, and emptiness is the clear glass of water. And as we try to understand it, and we're mixing the emptiness of which is clear water into our own mind stream, which is the cloudy red glass of Kool-Aid, then we're still not going to see it as it is because of the mixture, because of the ignorance that is also mixed in that. But as we start um, uh, allowing that subtle wisdom consciousness to examine emptiness, then it's more like a bodhisattva then has a mind that's clear like water, and the emptiness is clear like water, and it's like mixing water with water. I, that's probably not a good analogy, but it's the best one that I can come up with at this time. Sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. So if you think about the true wisdom, um, you making yourself available to true wisdom, for that true wisdom, which is your inherent nature to arise and um, to sift out and clean out the distorted delusional view that you have. It's like that, and every time you pour uh, more of the water into the colored, distorted, diluted mind stream, the more you dilute dilute the mixture in there, the more you dilute the delusion. And the time will come, if you just keep doing that, that a stainless kind of vision will arise in the mind stream. And after a while, it'll be like mixing water with water. And he says, and when one reaches that stage um, in both the Theravada path and the Mahayana / Vajrayana path, they call it approaching the stage of no more learning, no more learning. And so in the beginning, we should have a ferocious appetite to learn things, just to get information in there that can begin to impinge upon our ignorance. And then as time goes on, it moves from so much of an intellectual thing to a more deep-seated discriminating awareness. And then it moves on until one becomes uh, more prone to the experiential nature of things than the words and the letters of the law, the things that characterize or speak to the experience. They rather have the direct experience. When that happens, it starts to become more difficult to explain that to the person who only has the letters, but who are not having their own experiences. That's why you can't read your way into enlightenment. Um, and then as time goes on, um, um, the experience becomes everything to you. It's like learning how to swim. You get some instruction, you're in the water, but you're holding on to the side, and learning how to stroke with one hand and then with the other arm, how to, paddle your feet. And then time goes on. You may have these I forget what you call them, but you blow them up and they hold you on the water so you can get a feel for the fact that you can float, right? Actually, you can float without them, but you don't believe it, so they put them on you so that you feel safer that you're going to actually float and not sink. But then when you get a little stronger and a little less fearful of the water and you get in without them, if you tense up, you sink, but you find that if you relax, you do actually float. And then after a while, you start to like just stroke back and forth on the surface of the water. And then you start to streak through the water with your swimming strokes that you learned while you were on the side holding to the edge of the pool. And this practice is very much like that. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, and as above, so below. Um, and you can take a lot of things from your ordinary understanding, and you can apply it to your spiritual walk, your spiritual journey. And if you do, you'll find that it becomes something entirely different than what you thought it was. And you will give up so much of the striving that we do and can begin to just start um, trusting the experience and rejoicing in the lessons that you learn, that they bring happiness to you, um, and they comfort you uh, at those times when you cannot arouse happiness. At least they can bring you some comfort and allow you to be able to get through a tough situation. So it's very seldom that I end on time, but I am ending on time today, uh, simply because that's all that I feel that I'm to share with you. I hope this Dharma talk has been useful to you, and that you spend this week reflecting on some of the things that we've shared. And may you be well and happy and peaceful. May no harm come to you and no danger. May you always be able to meet with the inevitable difficulties of life. Especially this week, I want you to take a look at your propensities. In the monastery, what we learn to do is to limit the time people of same propensities limit the time they spend together, because one feeds the other with the same propensity, and then it uh, it just deepens that propensity. So um, I usually try to pair them up on assignments where they're very different in personality. Sometimes that creates some momentary suffering, because you like people who are like you, and you want to be around people who are like you. But if you understand that the purpose of this training is for one to come to the middle way, to find out what are their excesses or very strong views, how if they can soften them, how life feels better uh, to them, and that they can go through extraordinary circumstances with dignity and with ease. And when they get off track, they can easily and quickly get back on, because there's no self to defend. And so check out your friendships, check out who you like to be around, who you like to associate with. Are there people just like you, people who harbor the same views and notions and propensities? And um, is that really a good thing? Um, Sometimes we see that we need to cultivate other other friendships, and when we do, uh, if we can look at those relationships and appreciate their value, appreciate the person who's not like us, um, we can see where we can adjust some of our own attitudes, and we would be better for it. And we can also begin to appreciate people who are uh, different than us. It also causes our compassion to rise, because we have to, if we're going to be successful in this experiment, we have to come to some conclusion about why people do the things they do or say the things they say. And we have to come uh, to the realization that if they do things that are harmful, there's some underlying deep suffering that must be there. And if we really care, more than just wanting complain about them, if we really care, we will look for those factors. And maybe with our own strong arm, right, we can wish them to be free from their suffering and delusion. That's what budding bodhisattvas do. Yeah. Thank you.